A few hours before the United Rugby Championship final in Croke Park, Dublin, Ireland, Jamison Gibson Park pulled up with a minor injury that will see him ruled out for about 10 to 15 days.
10 to 15 days.
So he missed the final.
I've got no jokes left.
It went fine for Leinster. You know, they very much were okay with Luke McGrath instead. And a randomly, printed NPC that morning. More on that later. We will cover the URC finals and the Premiership finals to come. However, he is going to miss the game against Argentina. And in order to have some cover in training, the Lions have made the first number of call-ups. We didn't get to cover the ones last week for various logistical reasons.
Not on here. I talked about them on our TikTok whilst you were off work for a
But
day.
we want to go fully into Lions mode here, right?
Yeah.
And every Lions update, we're going to cover it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to dive into it, what it means, where it comes from, what we can read into it with the test series in mind, everything, right?
As much as we humanly can.
Yeah. So, in his place, they have gone like for like, JVP for JGP.
Yeah. So all I've done is change one initial, you know, but otherwise it's the same guys. The same player, nothing can go wrong, end of video, right? No, so it's a call-up that's raised a couple of eyebrows for a couple of reasons, right? The main one being, and it's the one that explains itself the best, right, that Jack van Poortvliet is not the fourth best scrum half in Britain or Ireland, right? Because most likely the fourth best scrum half available is Ben White.
Yes.
Okay? However, it explains itself. He's not available this week.
No,
he's not available to play on Friday. Toulon won their quarter-final on the weekend, so they're playing in the semi-final. The top 14 never ends, so he's got another 2 weeks potentially on his season. Obviously, when the Lions fly out to Australia, you would imagine if a scrum half got injured then, unless Jack van Poortvliet does really well in training this week, they would probably call up Ben White.
So there is a question mark here, right? Yeah. And Ben White being at Toulon has screwed him over. We talked about this in the lead-up.
Massively.
I think there's a very good chance he was in the initial squad if he hadn't been at Toulon. Now that he is, he's at best their fifth kind of cab off the rank here because he will miss the opening 3 games, right? Like, it takes them a while to fly out to Australia from France, right? So if they were to call him up, realistically, he wouldn't be available until game 4 of an 8-game tour. So they chose to leave him at home and not look at him here. If there is an injury in the second half of the tour, do they just call up Van Poortvliet because they'll be coming out a day's notice and he'll know the cause already? He'll have the stash. They'll have had the kit made up with his initials on them. They've already just scratched out Gibson Parks and just put his on them. So that's the easy thing, right? Are they getting someone in who can learn the calls and come in at a week's notice and play, frankly, a more similar game to the free scrum they've got there than Ben White, who is a different kind of player, but I don't think it's unfair to say a better player on this year's evidence than Van Poortvliet, who also critically missed most of the Six Nations. He only played against Wales, where he was excellent, where he was absolutely fantastic. Ben White played the whole Six Nations and was brilliant as well.
So bear in mind as well, to touch on the other call-ups that happened, obviously Finlay Bealham is in the official squad.
Yes.
So he's flying up to Australia, which
well
is brilliant.
deserved. We talked about at length on that tight episode, like there were 4 tight heads there, and we felt like initially you had Furlong carrying an injury, then Ferguson, and it turns out, there's talk of Furlong, he didn't play in the USC final, him still carrying an injury, they needed cover, hence them also calling up
Asher Poku-Forjo. Yes. So the fact that he's in ahead of Joe Hayes, who, let's be honest, probably would have been slightly... he's above him in the England pecking order, we'll put it that way, right? But Asher Poku-Forjo is a brilliant destructive scrummager. So he went to Portugal for their training camp there against the Portuguese national team, and he's been training this week ahead of the Argentine game on Friday night. Okay, so the thing is...
He has now been released.
Yeah, okay, he now?
He's been sent home,
Right, okay. Because you would say that if a tight head was to get injured and need someone to fly out to Australia, that Joe Hayes would be the natural man that you'd turn to, right? But the thing that we can't see as fans is how well Forjo's trained. That there is a chance that when they had their thing against Portugal, that he was turning Francisco Fernandes inside out. And Fernandes is just retired, hasn't he?
Yeah,
but still, like that he was absolutely dominant in that. Yeah. Or potentially, turning one of the pre-existing tight heads or loose heads inside out.
Well, this was the problem, right? Is that you had obviously, an injury, meaning that Furlong wasn't there.
Yeah.
Then, regardless of whether he's injured or not, Furlong wasn't going to be there. And Will Stewart wasn't there because he's with Bath, right? So now Stewart has arrived. They've let Apoku go. However, there was a period when they only had one tight head in Finley Bealham, who was being called up at that moment anyway. They had no tight heads initially, right? And I think there's two angles on this. One is, as you say, Joe Hayes plays for Leicester, right? So wasn't available until this week anyway. But the other angle on it is, do you go Asher Poku is the closest player we can call up to Taniela Tupou, who we'll be playing against? Are they just looking to train against someone who can offer the raw materials and prepare Finley Bealham for playing against him?
And you could probably say the same of Jack van Poortvliet, rather, and like Jake Gordon, for instance.
I think
that he's a very technically strong scrum half who will get the ball whizzing. And the other side of this, back to Van Poortvliet now. So there's a lot of other good scrum halves that he could have called upon. So we spoke a lot before about Conor Murray. He's probably put his feet up by now. I'm guessing that...
I said this to you this morning when the call-up was first happened, but I think Conor Murray was probably higher at the pecking order, not necessarily than Van Poortvliet, but than we'd think for the initial squad.
Yeah.
But now that he's a few weeks removed from having played a game and he doesn't have a club lined up for next season, as we know yet... Maybe by the time this comes out, as we're recording it, it's been announced that he's signed for San Diego Legion. Who knows? But
he better have.
But the situation with Conor Murray, right, is probably he is eating Pringles right now. He is probably lying there, having a few drinks every evening.
Yeah, he's getting wasted with the wife.
God, remember the days. Remember back in the days when I used to batter my body
I was captain
daily.
4 years ago.
Yeah. He's just signed up for a Now TV subscription to watch this tour.
Oh, yes, he has. Yeah.
So I think he's probably got his feet up, and he does move him down the pecking order, right? You then have Van Poortvliet here. The other question, there's a few other names that have come up as well, right? Namely, two names we grouped together when talking about scrum halves in Wee Georgie Horn and Wee Craig Casey.
Yeah, and also alongside that, Ben Spencer has come up.
Yeah.
With Spencer and Horn, right? They are very different types of nine to the ones that we're currently talking about. I think if Thomas Williams got injured, then maybe George Horn could be the guy to replace him as the guy with that kind of X factor, kind of magic nine who's different from the other guys. However, that's not what we're talking about here. So thinking about Ben Spencer, again, he was outstanding. We're going to talk about this when we talk about the Premiership final later. But he's been on phenomenal form, and he's one of those players who's shot up since the squad's been named, potentially in the pecking order.
This is one of these tricky things, right? And I think it'd be an interesting exercise to go through the squad and say how different would it have been if it was named now, the week after the domestic season ends, versus when it was named, right? Because would Henry Pollock be in now?
Recency bias is huge, isn't it?
But it was named the week after that semi-final when he was the hottest he's ever been.
Yeah.
And likewise, it's interesting, this call-up is getting more talk now because Ben Spencer was the better scrum half in the Premiership final.
Yeah.
And that is almost undeniable. And yet, I do think that Jack van Poortvliet is the second best scrum half in England.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's on ability, on total capacity, on his ceiling, on everything. I think his ceiling is actually higher than Alex Mitchell's.
Van Poortvliet was the third best scrum half in that final.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as you say, in terms of the ceiling, and above all, this is the thing I want to stress about this, right? So he's not been called up necessarily as a rugby player. He's been called up to do a Jameson Gibson Park impression.
Yeah.
He's been called up to do an impersonation of him run against potentially the starting team this weekend. And so Andy Farrell can say to him, right, can you do what JGP does and just fizz the ball out really quickly? Because he's got a faster pass and a crisper pass than Ben Spencer does. Even though Ben Spencer is potentially a better player, has, I would say, probably a better kicking game, and it's a bit quicker.
Yeah.
But JVP has the better pass, and that's what JGP does. So Farrell's clearly gone. Brilliant. Let's just get him to run that in training.
I think this is the interesting thing about Jack van Poortvliet, right?
Yeah.
And we haven't really talked about him as a player, but I think he is, of these scrum halves who are realistically in contention, and we mentioned Spencer, we mentioned Casey, we mentioned Horn. Is there anyone else really? Murray, I think, has probably dropped out now through Pringles.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else you think really is up there? Because I don't think Rodri Williams
Casey,
isn't. Kieran Hardy is a real outside shot. He's been playing incredibly well, but I don't think he's there.
He's miles away.
No,
I love Kieran Hardy.
But you're kind of going through the other nations, right? And you're
Caelan Blade. Get him on tour.
At that point, you're kind of dropping right down.
How about Ben Ashfar? Get him on tour.
Great shout. Ben Velicott, how are you feeling about him?
Yeah, get him there.
Yeah. Okay. So I think if you look at those as like the pack of nines that are roughly in contention,
Yeah.
Van Poortvliet is the most adaptable of them, right?
Yeah.
Like George Horn plays the George Horn game plan every time, and he has added an excellent box kicking to his game. However, his natural instincts are always ones that he back. Same with Craig Casey, right?
Yeah.
Of like, again, this isn't to say they're one-dimensional players, they're not, but Jack van Poortvliet you can put into any game plan and he will work, right? Like and it's why coaches love him. It's why I think like he is much more popular with coaches than he is with fans.
Yeah.
Because he is so, other than that one fan, who travelled over and made the gift basket that went semi-viral. But look it up if you didn't see it. But because he is so adaptable, because he's a brilliant box kicker, he's got a really crisp pass, he's a big guy. So if you want to play the Conor Murray, Mike Phillips role, you can do that. But also,
for sure.
yeah, like his natural game is clearly he likes to play fast, right? And you look at some of the snipes.
He's a membrane for the attack more
Yeah.
than he is like a player,
And
if that makes sense.
You look at, the Premiership final, I thought he didn't have his best game.
No.
And I kind of thought he potentially took himself out of consideration for this in that performance.
Also,
and
in
yet,
a way, I'd have said the same thing of George Horn against Leicester in the semi-final.
Yeah.
Like, as much as I love George Horn, and I want to see him get a shot on his Lions tour, but yeah.
And yet, right, in all of that, I think Van Poortvliet has been phenomenal for Leicester since coming back from injury.
Yeah.
He was brilliant for England against Wales. He was just absolutely superb. And then for Leicester, he has been one of the key cogs and finished second in the Premiership. Like, he has been at his best. And the big part of the problem, I think, a big part of why people don't rate him as highly as they should, is the injuries, right? Is every time he's got back up to looking like himself again, he's picked up another injury. And so we've never really seen him get a run to establish himself in people's minds. And instead they throw in, like, he'll have the one odd bad game like he did at the weekend. And it will be the thing that steps out, rather than being like, oh, remember that run of 10 games he had for England where he was brilliant, because he's getting like 3 or 4 games of being brilliant and then he gets injured.
Yeah. So I think there's one more angle we have to talk about here. And you mentioned him very briefly earlier, right? We had a bit of a conversation about this off air earlier, but the Craig Casey thing that's going on here. So a lot of, it's particularly like Munster fans who get to see him week in, week out and see, frankly, how brilliant he is.
He's a great player.
And he has been on outstanding form this season, right?
Since coming back from that injury post-infections.
His kicking game's been really good. He, much like Gibson Park and much like what we were saying about Van Poortvliet, plays incredibly fast, right? He goes 100 miles an hour and he's brilliant at it. But so we both really rate Craig Casey, right?
Yeah.
As a player.
Absolutely.
Like both at club level and when he's had his shot at international level, which hasn't been enough, sadly. And the fact that he's going on the current Ireland tour as captain, I hope says to me that like he's going to get more time in future, even though obviously he's not Gibson Park, which is the reason why he didn't get time. But even if it's on the bench, because if Ireland want to progress beyond a World Cup quarter-final, they need more than one option at 9 and 10, right? And they've now got that at 10, they need that at 9, okay? But the thing that concerns me, and we speculated on this, and you raised a very good point, that if Andy Farrell took Craig Casey seriously and rated him, he would have capped him more. He would have picked him on the bench above Conor Murray. And instead, he sees him as how we've just described Van Poortvliet as he's the guy who can be Gibson Park when Gibson Park isn't around.
Yeah, he's power strop Gibson Park to Andy Farrell.
Yeah.
Rather than his own player. I think.
Yeah, which is harsh, but I think that's, in a way, how Farrell views him. And it speaks volumes, right? That he's booked, Jack van Poortvliet a taxi to Stansted Airport and a flight out from there, first class, right? Rather than putting Craig Casey on a bus.
And he could pay Charles fare anyway. Yeah. Like, you could give him the Charles fare.
Yeah. And it's a shame because Casey has been on such good form recently.
I stand by what I said. I just don't think Farrell rates Casey that highly. Yeah. I don't think he likes him like that much as a scrum half. I don't think he's the type of scrum half he wants.
I think if there was another scrum half in Ireland who was like as good as him, that he would go instead, Conor Murray has been sat on the bench for Craig Casey because Craig Casey's been better than him for the last 3 years. And has really developed so many areas of his game and is so tenacious defensively. As I say, his passing game has come on such a long way. He can fizz the ball out now, and nobody currently playing international rugby or rugby whatever can do it quite to the level Gibson Park does. No. But that's not a bad second choice to have, how well he can pass and kick, he's very good at it and exceptional at club level. So I can totally see why Munster fans are frustrated by this because, as I say, they get to watch him week in, week out and see how good he is. But I think it says a lot that about where Farrell views him in the pecking order.
Maybe this is a hot take as well.
And maybe there's the size thing as well, helps Van Poortvliet.
Maybe this is a hot take, though. I think, in my opinion, Jack van Poortvliet is the 5th best scrum half in the British Isles.
I agree.
I
do agree.
Irish Isles.
I do agree.
Yeah. It would be James Gibson Park, Mitchell and Thomas Williams, Ben White, then Jack van Poortvliet for me, right?
You could arguably group White into the Mitchell and Thomas Williams group.
Yeah, I think you should. I think you should, in fairness. But
yes, Jack van Poortvliet, I would 100% say is the next best one.
Yeah.
And then you potentially got that Casey,
Spencer, Rafi Quirk, I think, hasn't had enough opportunity.
Yeah, and Georgie Horn. You've got that little bubbling group
Kieran Hardy.
Yeah, and then you've got Pringle Man somewhere down there.
Ali Davis also in contention. So
Ivan Van Zales maybe qualified in residency.
I think some of it is though just like, has Andy Farrell been looking at Jack van Poortvliet and thinking that's a guy I'd love to work with?
Yeah.
Right, for years. And now he's got the opportunity. And he couldn't justify putting the full squad when he only played one game in the Six Nations, and he hadn't yet had that full run for Leicester he's had now. And even if he had a dodgy 60 minutes at Twickenham, which wasn't all bad, like he wasn't terrible. He put a couple of kicks out
the full.
Yeah, and
a couple of passes weren't perfect.
Yeah.
But it was still good.
I thought it was his weakest game since coming back, and it was unfortunate it was in a final when most people were
That
watching.
just tells you about how high we hold standards of Lions players.
Exactly.
And that's just all it is.
Yeah. So I like it as a call-up.
Yeah, I like it.
He probably won't end up playing.
No.
But, we're probably going to end up with Mitchell and Thomas Williams. We'll get into a full preview of the game later in the week. But yeah, we just thought it was worth talking about.
I'll bring my Lions shirt for that one.
Yeah.
I left it at home. Sorry.
We are fully into Lions season. I'm very excited. This marks the start of what will probably be very regular Lions content.
There's one thing about this that's annoyed me.
Okay.
I've been snubbed again.
I know. How do
what
you feel
more
about
have
that?
I got to do?
Look, I thought it was between you and Ben Youngs.
Yeah.
For friend of the channel getting a call up.
Honestly, I'm quite disappointed that you put him on the pedestal with me. I think I'm a notch ahead.
There was a moment, right? We haven't talked about this publicly. When you first met Ben, because I'd done a few of the Love of Rugby stuff before, you
What are you about to say?
No. Where Ben, you were wearing Long Eaton kit because you were training that evening.
Yeah.
And Ben asked what club it was, I mentioned Long Eaton, and he asked what position you play. And his face lit up when you said you're a scrum half. Like he looked over the moon at what he was talking to another 9.
And then I said to him, what position do you play?
Yeah. So gutted neither of you made the squad.
Yeah.
Next time, you look, you can work as utility option. You played on the wing. You can play out there.
Oh, you know what? For the Lions, I'd do it.
For the Lions.
If my coach is watching me, don't you fucking dare put me there.